I'm going to show you a quick knockout from the FIDE Grand Prix tournaments taking place in Riga at the moment. There's so many interesting events going on. I just wanted to kind of catch up with some of the highlights. So this game is Alexander Grischuk against Nikita Vitiugov, played in round one. Now this is a knockout tournament and they play two classical games. If it's drawn, if it's 1-1, then they play two rapid play 25-minute games. If it's 1-1 at the end of those, then two 10-minute games. If it's drawn 1-1, two blitz games, and then an Armageddon game. But this was played after the first two classical games were drawn. So the time limit is 25 minutes plus, I think, 10 seconds per move. So, you know, not so rushed, basically. And we have a very orthodox start. And instead of, well, there are lots of moves for black there. Bishop b7, bishop b4, c5, c6. But knight d7, this is a clever little move order, waiting to see how white commits the queen's bishop before actually deciding how to play. And you know, you might still take on c4. That's one thing. If the bishop comes to g5, well, you might go in for a Cambridge Springs, or you might play the orthodox Queen's Gambit with bishop e7. Lots of things going on. And one of the ideas is that after bishop f4, you take on c4. So e3. Now bishop d6 is a fairly respectable move for black here. But Vitiugov plays knight b6. This is also one of the main lines. So hanging on to that pawn, well, it doesn't really. Actually, white can take this. But in recovering the pawn, then at least black manages to, well, black can get the two bishops here. Double attack, a check, and then you take the knight. And knight d5. So black is behind in development, but exploiting the fact that, you know, this bishop is attacked. I mean, obviously, if castles, then knight takes bishop. Nice to get the other bishop as well. So that bishop steps back, and now the idea of playing this, which looks a bit funny to move the knight, you know, for the second time in the opening. The idea is queen b6, and it just catches white a little bit off guard, attacking this pawn. If white had already castled here, then this move would be senseless, would be really silly to bring the queen out so early. But there are a few little tactical ideas here behind queen b6. Of course, you don't have to play queen b6, you can just develop with bishop b7, but this is trying to exploit the fact that white's king is still in the middle. So if castles, then in fact you can take this. And rook b1 isn't very good because that knight will be taken. And obviously there's a pin here. And if queen takes, there's another pin there. So that's the problem. It's not so easy for white. So the queen came back to e2. And now bishop b4. So this one is attacked. It's a little bit irritating. And the most obvious move to defend the knight, rook c1, can be met by queen b5. There's a funny move. But basically in this kind of position, let me just go on a move. You can see that here it's just a bit annoying for white that this square is covered and that knight can potentially drop back to come in here, for example. Another thing is, if this knight is defended with queen c2, then you've got queen a6 stopping the king castling. So there's just a narrow window of opportunity for black that he exploits the slightly strange placement of white's pieces and the fact the king hasn't castled. So here Grischuk decides, too complicated. Let me just give the pawn, get my king to safety. And of course this is a very tempting move because black is way behind in development. Of course, black has to be principled and take the pawn. But who wouldn't give up this pawn? I mean, this is fun for white. For one pawn, you've got free development. You're starting the middle game when black is still in the opening. Lots of lines for your pieces, and this looks like great fun for white. Attacking the bishop, which came back, and now e4. So you can see the idea behind bringing the rook up is that there is potential to swing across to the king side a bit later. Now, having said this is a pleasant position for white, it's certainly not lost for black. And here, black could just castle kingside because it's going to take a little bit of time to clear those pieces out of the way. And, you know, you have moves like f6 to cover some dark squares and pop the king in the corner. It's still playable for black. That's what should have happened. But instead, black played bishop c7, and this is certainly dubious. It's funny, after the game, Grischuk criticised his next move, which was bishop h4. He thought he should have just taken on c7 and played knight e5. And in that way to bring the rook across. Of course, this is very dangerous, but in fact it's still not completely clear. Another way of playing this is, instead of knight e5, to play e5 with the idea of knight g5. Again, brings the rook into the game, but the knight can cut back to e4. And if, well, let's say h6, then the knight will come into d6 this way as well. So yes, bishop takes is certainly very dangerous, and however, bishop h4 certainly wasn't bad either. Attacking the queen. Now, here black played queen d7, which certainly, well, okay, it's the best move. It's the best move. Let's just have a quick look at f6. Then there comes e5, and white's initiative is just huge here. And there's a really nice move, knight e5, exploiting the pin, and that gets the rook across. That's extremely dangerous. So that's why queen d7 was played. Not a very comfortable square for the queen, it must be said. Rook d1. Now the best move is f6. To bring potentially the queen across here. In fact, this is still a really strong move. It's too risky to take that. It just opens things up dreadfully. But actually, queen e7. Well, black is still hanging on here. Grischuk thought this was still a little bit unclear. He felt that black was still in the game. It's not very pleasant, it has to be said. With these points, very sensitive. But anyway, black should definitely do that. Instead, after rook d1, castles was played. And this is absolutely hopeless. Knight e5. So if that's taken, then bishop f6. Well, that's not too complicated. Followed by the queen and the rook coming over, and that is total destruction. So queen e8. But again, we have this very nice move, bishop f6. If black is given time to play f6, then it's still game on, but bishop f6 is a beautiful move. The idea is simply to block that pawn on f7, and that means that black's pieces are completely shut in. So after pawn takes bishop, queen h5, and that is absolutely the end of the story. Followed by rook h3. And mate, you can see the queen jams in the rook, and so the king can never escape. Comical situation. So Vitiugov played bishop d8, but didn't help. Bishop takes. A check. King steps in the corner. And that was the final move of the game. A shocker. Rook h3 and mate threatened, and if f6, then the queens are exchanged. And knight f7 mate. Wow, 23 moves, game over. Nice, very nice attacking performance from Grischuk, rather routine. Bishop f6, of course, there are several famous precedents for this move. I'm sure many of you will remember the game between Fischer and Benko from the US Championship 1963-64, where Fischer, well, it wasn't a bishop that went there, actually it was a rook, but the principle is the same, to block the f pawn and keep the queen shut in on e8. If you want to see that game, Fischer-Benko, beautiful win from Fischer, then do check out the link in the description down there, or it might be in the info tab up there. Just click on that and it'll take you through to that video. But yeah, nice game from Grischuk. I'll catch up with some results in the FIDE Grand Prix later. Maybe, if not in one of my regular videos, then maybe in the Hangout, which is going to be on, I think it's, let me check my diary, 24th of July. Join me for the Hangout. Okay, thanks for watching.